We can now bring in our European Affairs editor, Armen, Georgian. Armen, good to see you.
Right.
Von der Leyen says this is the most ambitious budget the EU's had. Is it that ambitious?
Well, it's certainly bigger than the current budget, Delano, so this figure of just under 2 trillion euros. If we take into account both inflation and the need to repay loans from the post-COVID recovery program, even if you factor those two things in, it's still bigger than the current budget. Of course, as I said, it's only a proposal. You mentioned that the reaction from Berlin. The Netherlands also doesn't like the increase in spending. I think France is going to have problems as well because it's trying to come up with its own austerity budget here to balance its books because of the big budget deficit in France. So, of course, there are going to be problems going forward with the national capitals. But I think if we just take the Commission's proposal, it does reflect the EU's sense that the EU is in a very dangerous moment. We don't know what's going to happen with this trade war with Donald Trump. There's trade tensions with China. We don't know what's going to happen with Ukraine long term. So I think the budget reflects these strategic worries. Just a quick point on Ukraine, because you mentioned that, Delano, the 100 billion euro Ukraine reserve that Ursula von der Leyen is putting forward, that's technically not part of this long-term budget. It's a separate instrument. So you do actually have these other instruments outside the budget, such as the Catalyst Europe loan scheme. So not every kind of spending is part of the budget, just to make that clear.
Now, we spoke about the opposition to this plan because, as you know, here in France, we've had the Prime Minister outline a plan to trim some 44 billion euros from next year's budget. Germany has already spoken out, you mentioned, but also farmers are going to not be happy with this plan from Ursula von der Leyen.
Yeah, so if we leave aside, the national capitals, we've sort of covered that. But if we take the actual sectors that are affected by this budget proposal, if you look at the common agricultural policy, so the big agriculture budget, it was 386 billion euros in the current budget. That now goes down to 300 billion euros in this proposal. So it's a big drop. There was already protests by farmers in Brussels yesterday, and one wonders what this cut is going to do to the whole farmers' movement, because, of course, we remember those big protests in February 2024 when they reached their peak. One has to wonder whether this cut is going to bring back all these farming issues that led to that big protest movement across the EU. I just want to take two other quick policy areas which I find particularly interesting, Delano. If we look at environmental issues, so particularly biodiversity, that used to have its dedicated sort of earmarked section of the EU budget. It no longer does in this proposal. It's basically merged into a climate and an environment target. So I think the fact that the Commission has done that is going to feed into this whole narrative that already exists, that somehow the EU is undoing the Green Deal, that it's backtracking on its long-term environmental and climate action goals. I'm sure we're going to hear more on that. And just one final area, which we've worked on a lot here in our European department at France 24, is regional policy, because, there's big disparities within the EU. We forget that there are some regions, the outer-lying regions, for example, which have, much less development than more urban areas. And I was just talking to somebody from one of the regional governments in Brussels yesterday who was saying he was very worried about what this budget was going to do for regional development in the Azores, which is part of Portugal, but it's one of these peripheral regions. So I think we're going to hear a lot more from those regions as well. So definitely a lot of concerns about various sectors affected by this new budget proposal.
Interesting stuff. Thank you very much for that, Armen.